Hey everyone, Complex back with another video, and today we're back to Anthem. That's right, there was a blog update on the BioWare blog talking about Anthem 2.0 and potentially what we can see from Javelin gameplay as well as builds in the update for Anthem that still has no release date yet. Now, the blog post was chock full of some really interesting information, and I wanted to walk you through it, so let's just dive on into it. Before we get into the nitty-gritty of this blog post, let me just preface by saying that this is all what they're potentially hoping for. It's ideas, it's mock-ups, it's kind of where everything's headed. Nothing set in stone. I personally have not tested or played or even seen anything remotely in person about Anthem 2.0. I actually don't know anybody that has. So just take all of this with a grain of salt, as things could change at any moment within the development cycle of Anthem 2.0. But with this blog post, this is just some exciting stuff that could potentially be coming along with it. Now, this blog post was primarily about the Javelin builds that are potentially coming with the update. And even at the start of the blog post, they mentioned that one of the common themes of feedback that they got from the community was that Anthem doesn't offer satisfying Javelin builds. Now, for myself personally, it wasn't that I found the Javelin builds unsatisfying. It's just that I found them really hard to replicate. A lot of times people come into when I was streaming or ask me on YouTube, like, hey, how did you get your build for your interceptor or something like that? And a lot of it's RNG based off of the inscriptions, and I couldn't say, well, you need this, this, and this, because it's heavily dependent on the inscriptions that I got, and that's what gave me such, well, insane melee for my interceptor. And it's looking like with where they're taking 2.0, this isn't necessarily going to be the same way anymore, which I, for one, am a huge fan of. Now, the overarching theme to this blog post was choice and experimentation within your Javelin's loadout. And it seems like the primary way they're going to potentially allow you to do this is through a skill tree. So it's sounding like each Javelin is going to have a basic skill tree, and then from there will also be unique skill trees that you can start to tailor your gameplay style to whatever you prefer, and then that way you can feel more comfortable potentially with the Javelin and start to make yourself a build. Now, the interesting part of all of this is that the abilities are actually going to be unlocks and no longer drops within the game. So if you wanted to get X ability for your interceptor, you're not necessarily going to have to grind it out in the world and hope for that to drop off of a bad guy or be in a chest. It sounds like now the abilities are actually just going to use skill points in order to unlock. Now, how many skill points, how we get skill points or anything like that, we don't know yet. So I don't know if it's going to be a better system or a worse system, but it is interesting that we no longer necessarily have to grind for them in the traditional way. It's going to be more of a skill tree based system. Now, taking that one step further, they did also mention that inscriptions are now meant to just improve the synergy of your build as opposed to being the primary factor. Now, if you're newer-ish to Anthem, the inscriptions were under, let's say you got an ability and it would say like plus 400 weapon damage or plus 50 to elemental or whatever it was. And those were your inscriptions, so they are no longer going to be the primary factor at play potentially. They are just now going to be a boost to everything. And it is also mentioned that you're going to be able to spend these skill points on things like abilities, passives, and stat boosts. The stat boost part is pretty interesting, as I don't know what that specifically applies to yet. It could be exactly what it says and just boost stats. It could replace something else down the road. We don't know. We'll have to wait and see and get some more information. Now, another interesting thing that was mentioned is that there is something new coming in, which is called an artifact. Now, they did also mention in this blog post that they heard that components felt nothing more than a stat modifier for a lot of players. And, well, yeah. I mean, I personally used my components for just the ability to buff my melee and my poison, and that was pretty much it. So they are taking that into consideration, and as a result are potentially introducing something called an artifact. It is supposed to be a piece of a super powered tech that will set your Javelin and Freelancer apart. And they go on further to mention that this is going to be distinct to the class itself. So they gave the example that a Ranger's rocket pod could now potentially be upgraded to something called a Skyfell launcher artifact, which would change how that launcher that rocket pod rather behaves. And they were also mentioning that this is going to also change how it looks on the Javelin itself, which is really cool and something that I do hope actually makes it into the 2.0 build. Now, the last big takeaway from this blog post for myself personally was the introduction of a primary and secondary weapon. If you've played Anthem before, you'll know that you can pretty much pick whatever weapon you want to go in whichever slot, which a lot of people I know have been a fan of. But with this, we don't know what primary and secondary mean. Does it mean that you're only going to be able to use X, Y, and Z weapon in the primary and then a few others in the secondary? Does it mean that stats might potentially change if you put your assault rifle in primary or secondary? We don't know. We'll have to wait and see what information comes further or just whenever 2.0 launches. But that is something to bear in mind and something that could potentially make builds either more interesting or more frustrating depending on what kind of player that you are. Now, overall, one of the things that I have noticed is that there's a lot, and I mean a lot of potential changes coming into the way that we interact with our Javelin, from the artifacts to now having a skill tree to having skill tree points and everything like that. And it is sounding like they're trying to make your pilot and your Javelin slightly distinctive from each other. And now that is a good thing, as I would love my pilot to have more of an identity, because now I more identify with my Javelin as opposed to my Javelin and my pilot. So if eventually we saw that they felt like two distinct entities, that would be fantastic. But what makes me a little curious and interested to see what happens from here is that within the lore of Anthem, they did a fantastic job of explaining how your pilot powers up the Javelin and how that all rolls through with the Anthem of Creation. And with the introduction of things like artifacts and stuff like that, I wonder if they're going to give us a lore reason, or any reason, in fact, that this will actually work within the given lore, or if things are going to be rewritten or what. So I am super curious to see where this is going to go. The other thing is, I don't know if our current builds are going to work anymore. This is an entirely different and what is seemingly more of a unique system than what we have now. So there is a potential that your current build might not work. It might work. They might have everything transfer. We don't know yet. So there are still a lot of questions up in the air, but I am definitely looking forward to potentially having a skill tree and allowing that level of customization within Anthem. That would actually be a lot of fun. But y'all, that's pretty much it. That's what I wanted to touch upon from today's Anthem blog post. I will leave a link for it in the description down below, just in case you would like to read it yourself. I can't wait to see what more information we get from the Anthem team, and am very much looking forward to seeing 2.0 overall. I hope you have a fantastic rest of your night and or day, depending on where you are in the world, and I will catch you next time. Bye, guys.